Jeanette Ralston was a 24-year-old wife and mother living in the Bay Area of California in the late 1970s. Just before midnight on January 31st, 1977, Jeanette stepped out of San Jose's Lion's Den bar, accompanied by a man her friends didn't recognize. By the next morning, she would be found slain in her car, a crime that would go unsolved for nearly 5 decades. In the early morning of February 1st, 1977, the superintendent of an apartment complex on Graham Avenue noticed Jeanette's Volkswagen Beetle in the visitors' parking area. He felt that something looked off about the vehicle and decided to investigate further. Looking inside, the super found a horrific scene. Jeanette's lifeless body was wedged in the back seat of the car. Investigators also found burn marks inside the car, indicating a failed attempt to light the evidence on fire. San Jose police immediately opened an intensive investigation. Jeanette's friends provided a description of the unknown man from the bar, and a composite sketch of the suspect was created. Unfortunately, no one recognized the man in the sketch, and no solid suspects were identified in 1977. It appeared Jeanette had fallen victim to a chance encounter with a predator, and there were few clues about his identity. Crucially, police also recovered Jeanette's pack of smokes from the car and noted a fingerprint on it that didn't belong to her. In the 1970s, however, there was no computerized database to search for fingerprint matches, and DNA profiling didn't yet exist. Investigators compared the print against local files, but they couldn't find a match at the time. With scant leads and technology lagging behind the evidence, the case gradually went cold. By the 2010s, significant advances in forensic science offered new hope for solving the Ralston case. Santa Clara County's Cold Case Unit teamed up with San Jose detectives to re-examine the evidence with modern techniques. In 2024, investigators decided to rerun the old fingerprint from Jeanette's smokes through the latest databases. In August 2024, authorities finally identified that fingerprint as belonging to Willie Sims, a 69-year-old man living in Ohio. Back in the 1970s, there was no automated national fingerprint database, so Sims's subsequent arrest in 1978 had never been linked to Jeanette's case. The name was unfamiliar to the original case file, but further digging revealed that Sims had been in California at the time of the slaying. In 1977, he was a young Army private stationed at Fort Ord, not far from San Jose. Even more striking, Sims had a violent history. In 1978, he was convicted of assault with intent to commit a slaying in Monterey County. After serving a prison term for that offense, he left California, apparently permanently. With Sims now identified as a suspect, the cold case team moved quickly to confirm the DNA evidence. In early 2025, Santa Clara County investigators, working with Ohio police, obtained a DNA sample from Sims while he was in Ohio. The Santa Clara County Crime Lab compared Sims's sample to evidence from 1977. The results were decisive. Sims's DNA matched DNA found under Jeanette's fingernails. This forensic breakthrough provided the proof investigators needed that the same man identified by the fingerprint had indeed been at the crime scene. Based on the new evidence, prosecutors in Santa Clara County charged Willie Eugene Sims with the slaying of Jeanette Ralston. In May 2025, authorities in Ohio arrested the 69-year-old at his home in the town of Jefferson. Sims was brought before a judge in Ashtabula County, and at his arraignment, he waived his right to fight extradition to California. Arrangements were then made to transport him back to San Jose to face the charges. If convicted of Jeanette's slaying, Sims faces a penalty of 25 years to life in prison. Importantly, investigators have noted that many key witnesses from 1977 are still alive to testify. The friends who last saw Jeanette with the suspect, for example, can now potentially identify him in court. Willie Sims remains innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, be sure to check out my other channels for hundreds of hours of content related to mysteries and history. On February 15, 1974, 25-year-old Mary Kathleen Schlais left her apartment in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to hitchhike to an art show in Chicago. Schlais was an accomplished artist and an honors graduate of the University of Minnesota. She set off that morning after saying goodbye to her roommate, planning to catch rides on her way to Illinois, but she never arrived at her destination. Later that same day, her body was discovered in a snowbank along a rural road in Dunn County, Wisconsin, about 90 miles from Minneapolis. She had been brutally attacked, ending the life of this promising young woman far too soon. The discovery of Mary Schlais's body set off a massive investigation. Initially, a passing motorist reported seeing a man dump what he believed to be a body from a car and then speed away from the scene. The witness described the suspect as a roughly 30-year-old man driving a newer model gold-colored vehicle. Investigators rushed to the area and quickly confirmed that this witness had indeed seen a body being dumped off. Schlais's personal belongings, including her purse and coat, were missing, suggesting the perp might have taken them to conceal evidence or as a grisly souvenir. Detectives scoured the vicinity for clues and noted a peculiar piece of evidence, a knitted winter hat left near the body, which likely didn't belong to Mary. In 1974, forensic science was in its infancy, and the case depended on old-fashioned police work. Based on the eyewitness account, detectives circulated a composite sketch of the unknown suspect and an alert about the gold car, hoping to generate leads. Multiple law enforcement agencies in Wisconsin and Minnesota, including the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation, pooled their efforts in the search for the offender. Officers interviewed people who might have seen Mary or the suspect that day, but despite these efforts, no arrest was made. The composite sketch and vehicle description were publicized widely, yet no one could identify the mystery man. Mary's case gradually turned cold as the trail grew increasingly faint. Over the ensuing decades, the Schlais file was periodically dusted off and re-examined. Detectives revisited the physical evidence whenever a new forensic technique became available. They had preserved what they could: the cap, hairs found on it, and other samples from the scene. By the late 1990s, DNA profiling had emerged as a revolutionary tool. Technicians analyzed the hairs from the cap and managed to develop a partial male DNA profile, which they uploaded to CODIS hoping for a hit. But the result was disappointing, since the profile matched no one in the database. With no DNA match and no new witnesses, the case remained stubbornly unsolved. In 2023, a groundbreaking forensic tool finally gave the investigation new life: genetic genealogy. The Dunn County Sheriff's Office partnered with a team at Ramapo College in New Jersey, who agreed to apply this innovative method to the Schlais case. The Ramapo team painstakingly constructed an extensive family tree from the DNA data, searching for any branch that could lead to a viable suspect. According to one investigator, the family tree research in the case was very complicated and ended up taking a year to complete, but the results were worth it. Finally, the research uncovered a crucial detail: an adoption in the perpetrator's family had obscured the suspect's true identity. The man responsible for Mary's slaying was not listed in public records under the same name as his biological relatives. However, once the genealogists were able to resolve this issue, the puzzle pieces all began to fall into place. By late 2024, nearly 50 years after the crime, they identified the likely perp as John Keith Miller, an 84-year-old man living quietly in Owatonna, Minnesota. Miller was 33 years old at the time of the slaying, aligning with the description the eyewitness had given in 1974. Armed with this discovery, Dunn County authorities moved swiftly, and they obtained a DNA sample from Miller to confirm the match. On November 4, 2024, investigators received the evidence they needed. Miller's DNA was a definitive match to the crime scene profile from 1974. 3 days later, on November 7, 2024, officers knocked on John Miller's door and arrested him for the slaying of Mary Schlais. Miller's name had never appeared in the case file before, and he had no prior record that would have put his DNA in any database. When officers first questioned the elderly Miller, he denied any involvement in Schlais's slaying. But once confronted with the DNA results, Miller couldn't escape the truth. According to the criminal complaint, he admitted that on that winter day in 1974, he picked up Mary as she was hitchhiking. Miller said he asked her for intimate contact in exchange for the ride, and when 25-year-old Mary refused, he exploded in anger, ending her. Miller described for investigators how he disposed of Mary's body. He had pulled off the highway onto a quiet country road and dragged her out of his vehicle. He attempted to hide her remains in a snowbank by the roadside. At that moment, the headlights of a passing car came into view, startling Miller and causing him to flee, leaving Mary's body behind in the snow. In his haste, Miller also left behind his hat, the very piece of evidence that would, decades later, tie him to the crime. In March 2025, rather than stand trial, the 84-year-old Miller pleaded no contest to the case against him. A judge subsequently sentenced him to life in prison for the slaying, bringing closure to this case after more than 50 years. Also, just as a quick aside, pleading no contest means a defendant doesn't admit guilt, but accepts the conviction as though they had pled guilty. It has the same legal effect as a guilty plea, and results in sentencing without trial. However, unlike a guilty plea, it generally can't be used as an admission of fault in civil lawsuits. It's unclear here why Miller took this route, but it can be speculated that he didn't want to further open himself up to any civil suits as a result of what he did to Mary. In February 1979, the community of Beaumont in Southern California was shattered by the disappearance and brutal slaying of 17-year-old Esther Gonzalez. Esther Gonzalez was described as a shy but friendly 17-year-old high school student. She was the fourth of 7 children in a close-knit family and was particularly close with her sister Elizabeth, who was just a year older. On the afternoon of February 9, 1979, Esther set out on foot from her parents' home in Beaumont, California, heading to her sister's house in the neighboring city of Banning. It was a short trip and one she had likely made before. But that day, Esther never arrived at her sister's home. As evening fell with no sign of her, the Gonzalez family grew anxious. The worst fears of her loved ones were confirmed the next day, when a chilling discovery was reported to authorities. On the morning of February 10, 1979, a call came into the Riverside County Sheriff's Station in Banning. An anonymous male caller reported finding a body dumped off Highway 243, a winding mountain road near Banning, and noted it was lying in the snow. The caller's demeanor struck deputies as odd. He was described as argumentative and oddly evasive. For instance, they had asked him whether the body was male or female, and he reportedly freaked out and asked why they were questioning him. This suspicious level of defensiveness immediately put the so-called Good Samaritan on the radar of the authorities. Deputies raced to the remote location south of Poppet Flats Road, and there, in a snowbank by the roadside, they found the lifeless body of a young woman. It didn't take long to identify the victim as Esther Gonzalez, who had been reported missing after failing to reach her sister's house. A grim scene made it clear that Esther had been subjected to a brutal and unnatural assault prior to being slain. Immediately, detectives opened an investigation, vowing to find whoever was responsible for such a heinous act. From the start, the strange phone tip about Esther's body provided the first clue. The fact that the anonymous caller had not identified himself and had behaved argumentatively aroused significant suspicion. Investigators sensed that the caller might know more than he claimed. Tracing a tipster in 1979 wasn't as simple as it would be today, but within 5 days, Riverside County Sheriff's investigators managed to track down the caller. He was identified as 27-year-old Randy Williamson, a local man living in the area. Detectives brought Williamson in for questioning about how he came to quote-unquote discover the body. Initially, he claimed he had stumbled upon Esther's remains, but had been reluctant to get involved. Under considerable scrutiny, Williamson maintained his innocence. Investigators had no physical evidence tying him to the crime at that time. DNA profiling didn't exist yet, and other forensic techniques were limited. Eager to clear his name, Williamson agreed to take a polygraph exam, which was a common investigative tool in that era. In a development that would later haunt the case, he passed the polygraph test. In the eyes of these detectives in 1979, passing a lie detector was enough to be cleared of any wrongdoing. With the only known suspect seemingly off the hook and no arrest made, the investigation into Esther's case hit a devastating standstill. Williamson was no longer considered a suspect at all, and detectives were frustratingly left without any other leads. Despite substantial community pressure and local attention on Esther's case, the case would quickly go cold. Decades later, a fresh set of investigators would realize just how close the initial detectives were to cracking the case. In 2022, Riverside County authorities formed a dedicated cold case task force, and Esther's case was prioritized. In 2023, the team decided to leverage the latest DNA technology. They sent the preserved DNA evidence to Othram, a private forensic laboratory in Texas, specializing in genetic genealogy. Othram scientists conducted advanced DNA testing, generating a comprehensive genetic profile of the unknown suspect from the crime scene. This profile was then used in a genealogical database search, building out family trees of possible relatives of the suspect. As the forensic genealogy investigation progressed, a crime analyst on the cold case team pieced together the leads. In early 2024, nearly 45 years after Esther's death, investigators had a stark realization. The man who had been their prime suspect in the beginning, Randy Williamson, had never been cleared by modern forensic standards. He had simply been crossed off as a suspect and never reinvestigated on the basis of the polygraph test alone. Also, just as a quick reminder, polygraphs are neither scientifically reliable nor admissible as evidence in court. Polygraphs measure physiological responses, not lies. Anxiety, fear, or medical conditions can trigger false positives or negatives. However, the absolute lack of anxiety or fear can also trigger false negatives. Notably, polygraphs are unreliable for psychopaths and sociopaths because they often lack physiological responses to stress or guilt. These are the responses which the interpreter relies on to detect deception. With all that said, I'm sure you can see the problem with ruling someone out as a suspect for this sort of crime on the basis of a polygraph. The hunt for Williamson was on, but they soon found that he had perished at the age of 62 in Florida. Notably, during his autopsy, a blood sample was taken, and it had been kept on file. Working in coordination with Florida authorities, Riverside County detectives obtained Williamson's autopsy blood sample. They sent it to the California Department of Justice's forensic lab for comparison against the crime scene DNA. In November 2024, the results came in. Williamson's DNA was a match to the DNA recovered from Esther Gonzalez's body. Modern science had finally caught up with the perpetrator. After 45 years, the mystery was solved, and the very man who had reported finding Esther's body in 1979 was now confirmed to be the one responsible for her demise. While Williamson unfortunately had the luxury of living out the remainder of his life as a free man, this finding brought a sense of resolution to the family. In an interview in 2024, Elizabeth, the sister who Esther was going to see on that fateful day, expressed a mixture of emotions. She expressed happiness to finally have closure in Esther's case, but expressed sadness that the man would never truly face justice for his disturbed actions. As of now, it's not clear if Randy Williamson is currently being investigated in relation to any other slayings. Personally, I can't see a situation in which he isn't going to be investigated further, given the amount of unsolved slayings in California in the 1970s. Though I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere yet, I'd imagine there's a significant possibility that Williamson may have been a serial offender. After all, people generally don't just do what was done to Esther and decide that they've had their fill, especially after getting away with it, with no consequences whatsoever. That said, based on the evidence at present, that does just remain speculation on my part.